And you know, when we come to that place where the presence of God is manifested, don't expect it to necessarily look nice and neat and tidy. We get very concerned sometimes if church gets messy. That's why I wanted you to picture in your mind what happened when the presence of God came at this time of the dedication of the temple. For a start off, everybody without exception fell flat on their faces on the ground. I can remember a time as a youth director taking about 100, 110 young people away to Norfolk, to a place called Letton Hall. And there we used to have some amazing weekends. They were just brilliant weekends. I loved them, again, despite the various things that had happened to me whilst I was there, including perfume on my pillow and lace upon my pajamas, and on one occasion being hung out of a window in a fireman's harness, and fire alarms being set off at 3 o'clock in the morning. But despite all of that, there were some amazing times of encounter. And there's one time that still vividly sits in my mind, and it was a Sunday morning. And we were just worshiping. And do you come to church and think this is going to be another ordinary morning? I think we need to get into a sense of saying when we come, we're expecting something extraordinary to happen, because actually we're expecting God to turn up. And we're expecting God to manifest his glory and his majesty and his power. And here we have that plea that comes from Solomon's heart. And maybe it's a plea that should come from our hearts before we come out to church on a Sunday morning. Solomon cries out to God, is God, will you come? Will you come? And God responds to a cry like that. And if there is that plea in your life and in your heart for God to come, God will come. So that when Elijah cried it, God came. When those men and women gathered in that upper room cried it, God came. When Moses went and stood in that wilderness in front of that bush, God manifested himself. But on this Sunday morning, there was this amazing sudden sense of God's presence. And you sense a tangible change in the atmosphere. And I was at the front, and I was just worshiping, but I heard a noise. And I wasn't quite sure what it was. And when you're leading something, you actually have a responsibility just to keep an eye on what's going on. And I just had a look to see. And without exception, over 100 young people, corporately and collectively, had just fallen on their knees. They just began to weep tears as the presence of God just began to minister to their lives, began to just touch them, began to just move upon them, began to fill them, began to just release them. And you know, I just love it when God comes like that. When there is that divine interruption, when the presence of God is manifested, when we fan the flame with our praise, and as we do that, that flame grows ever brighter, and suddenly God is there in the place, and we sense and understand that God himself is just beginning to minister to us. And when that happens, there is nothing that we need do, just like the priests on this occasion. When God came, they just stood back and let it happen. And that's my heart and yearning, that God will come, that God will turn up, and that God will manifest himself as we fan the flame that allows his Holy Spirit to just move and minister to us. You see, because when God comes, you're never the same. You're never the same. And if you look at every man or woman who ever encountered God, they were never the same again. Jacob encounters God. It changed his name, but it changed him physically. From the moment that he met with God, he physically carried the evidence of that encounter. And sometimes, you know, when we meet with God in such a dynamic way, we carry something. and that which we carry is not always to our advantage. There is a cost in that encounter. And yet in that encounter, there is that sense in which no price is too great. If but for a moment we might experience and know such an intimate and such an amazing and such an awesome encounter with the living God. And today I believe that as we, as the people of God, begin to just say, look, I just want to know what it is to be in that place of reality, in that place of destiny, in that place where I just know and experience that whole sense of the flame of the Spirit of God touching and permeating my heart and my life. As we begin to get that sense of passion for the presence of God, as we begin to prioritize our lives so that we begin to say to God, God, whatever my program is, your program is greater. Whatever it is that I feel is important, you are of much more importance. Whatever I have put in my diary, I want you to know that I am prepared to lay aside whatever it is necessary to lay aside in order that I might prioritize you and your presence, so that I might begin to fan the flame which allows your Spirit to start to burn ever brighter in my life. Because you see, as the flame touches your lives as individuals, so the flame then comes together and burns as an enormous blaze from this very place. And that blaze begins to start to be contagious. One of the things that you know about fire is that if you set something alight in the wrong place, it very easily can start to impact and affect other places around. There are times in our garden where we've had a very large bonfire. On one occasion, it was almost too large, and we set fire to it, and we've thrown on it some old fence panels, and boy, they really do go. And we know they really went because all the trees around the area where the fire was, they carried the evidence of the flame, because all of them had been singed and affected by the flame as that flame flew up into the air and as it began to just touch areas around. You know, I want Chelmsford to be singed with the flame of the power of the Spirit of God as we, the people of God, capture something of that sense of flame of the Spirit as it permeates our lives and as we begin to be released into our destiny and into that place where we see and experience the reality of God's presence and God's power.